experience. This is 17 years worth of a journey, which in not that many pages. So I'm going to scoot ahead to 1997. In the summer of 1997, I began to experience frightening and strange episodes in the middle of the night. As if in the midst of a pyrotechnic dream, I would suddenly be violently awakened from deep sleep by loud explosions and brilliant flashes of light going off in my head. Waking up in a cold sweat with my heart racing, I knew I had reached a new low in my journey. I had never experienced anything like this in my life, and I sought medical attention at once. The day I visited my doctor's office in July 1997 remains vividly etched in my mind. I watched from my prone position on the examination table as the electrocardiogram tracing rolled off the machine. There in bold wording was my long-awaited answer, third-degree heart disease, potentially life-threatening cardiac arrhythmia. My first reaction was, that can't be me. That must be the last person who had an ECG. I wanted to believe my reading must be the next in the machine, but it was me. That tracing was an undeniable recording of my heart rhythm, or more appropriately, arrhythmia. The ensuing moments in the doctor's office were a surreal blur. Mouths moved, but words were incomprehensible. After 41 years of taking for granted that my heart would beat regularly, after propelling me through 2 Boston marathons and years of running, my heart had suddenly failed me. In a moment, my life had changed forever. The very seat of my soul, as many believe the heart to be, had somehow become dysfunctional. My gut instincts were finally confirmed after years of testing. It was not about stress. And then I go on. So that was really sort of the end of the beginning, as I call it, the end of that period where, I was told there was nothing wrong, that, there really was something wrong. One explanation that came to mind was Lyme disease, a systemic and potentially life-threatening illness transmitted by ticks. I had no recollection of a tick bite, nor could I recall having anything that looked like the classic bullseye skin rash associated with Lyme disease. I'll get to this in a moment. Yet it seemed a reasonable explanation since Lyme disease can affect the heart, even leading to heart block in severe cases. In fact, it's one of the underlying causes of third-degree heart block in a young person without other risks of heart disease. It would also explain the weight loss and constitutional symptoms from which I suffered, including fatigue, malaise, fibromyalgia-like pains, and insomnia. But how could someone living in Florida have Lyme disease when it's predominantly found in the Northeast, Upper Midwest, and Middle Atlantic regions? When I mentioned it to my doctors, they fixated on the fact that Lyme disease was supposedly never seen in Florida. True, it's more common in places like New England, New York, New Jersey. However, Lyme disease has been identified in 49 states. You probably want to know where the one state is where it's not identified.
I figured.
Diseases travel, as we know from other examples, like hantavirus and West Nile virus. Hantavirus was initially seen in the Southwest, but it quickly arrived in other parts of the country, like California, New England, and even South Florida. In one summer, the West Nile virus seemed limited to New York City. The next thing we knew, it was spreading throughout the United States. Birds migrating from endemic areas in the upper Midwest carry infected ticks southward during their winter migration. I understood we're a mobile society, so are diseases. Lyme disease can be a latent infection taking months to years from the time of the initial tick bite until manifestations are full blown. Since I had spent several years in the Boston area hiking and jogging in the woods of New England, it seemed reasonable that I might have had it. I even went so far as to request the blood test for Lyme be sent to the clinical lab at Yale University Medical Center, thought to be one of the top Lyme disease centers in the United States. My cardiologist in Miami agreed, and we waited for the test results before making a final decision on whether or not to insert a permanent pacemaker. I prayed that the answer to my long sought-after question might finally arrive. Could this treatable infectious disease be the cause of my troubles? Was I about to stumble on a solution? After several agonizing days spent waiting and praying for good news, which for me would have been a positive diagnostic test, my cardiologist called me with the news. Neil, he said, the blood test was negative for Lyme disease. He provided no further details. I only knew that I was about to receive a new body part, a permanent heart pacemaker. After struggling to find the cause of my mysterious illness and grasping had a glimmer of hope that it might be Lyme disease, I was back to square one. I was idiopathic. So it turns out that I forced my doctors to repeat that test multiple times, and finally it came back positive. And I was treated with very intensive antibiotic therapy, and again, all of the symptoms resolved with the exception of my heart problem.
What test did they use?
They actually so the one that was negative was not really negative, and I think it was sent by the standard Quest or LabCorp. So I had very high titers, IgM titers. So the antibody, the testing, many probably know this, it's a two-part test. They test for the titers of antibodies that your body is responding against the infection, and then to make sure that those antibodies are not against some other agent, that those antibodies aren't cross-reacting with other normal bacteria. They do a Western blot, which is essentially blotting for specific proteins against Borrelia, which is the bacteria. So I've probably done 1,000 more Western blots in my life in the lab. When I found out that I lacked a band or two, and that's why I was being called idiopathic, and I had all the signs and symptoms, but the Center for Disease Control has set up these very strict criteria for what should be considered Lyme disease or what shouldn't, and it's based on the number of bands on a Western blot, which is like 1960 science. In 2016, when we're into the era of genomic medicine, to be using immune responses. We all have different immune systems. There are now multiple strains of the bacteria,
Exactly.
which are very different.
Sure.
And there's only one strain, and it's a laboratory strain that is used by, and I'm not blaming Quest or LabCorp, but there's one strain that probably does not account for all the heterogeneity in the other strains. So for you, first of all, Lyme disease is in Texas.
Yes.
Of course. All of us got it here. We're living it.
Oh,
Second of all,
my.
you have to question,
Well, I got
sadly,
stabbed.
the tests that people are relying on whether or not to treat you. There are some new tests. There's a urine test from a very good friend of mine who is a phenomenal cancer researcher who developed a platform technology, not specifically for Lyme disease, but it was actually for some other. I have no financial stake in this company, but they are excellent scientists. It's a test from a company called Cirrus Nanosciences, and it evidently has picked up at least a third of patients who test negative by the standard serologists. You should not have bacterial protein in your urine if you have stress or idiopathic condition. So it's a good test.
Would you ever recommend a Western blot? I know that we all know the answer to this, but someone who's watching this video might want to know.
So here's my answer, is that all these physicians, and I know there's some here, were trained to use their clinical skills. And so Western blot is a way to perhaps either solidify, confirm what you think you already know, but if you highly suspect Lyme disease based on symptoms, then I think a Western blot that doesn't fit neatly, in the algorithm should not be used to deny patients treatment. The answer is, I think we need better tests, is the answer. So, we should not, as clinicians, be advocating our clinical skills to a laboratory test that is clearly inferior with regard to making a diagnosis. That's my answer to that. There's one section here I was going to read, but sometimes, so I have a female heart, and I tell people that I used to be pretty emotional even before I got a female heart. Now I'm even more emotional.
Oh, really?
So I usually just say that's my female side.
That's hilarious.
As long as you're
So
emotionally available,
I
that's
was
fine.
going to read
Not
this
emotional.
section, which is pretty graphic, about getting defibrillated. So this happened many times along the way, and again, it's something that I would never wish on my worst enemy. In the summer of 2006, I was having a great time swimming with my daughter Celeste, who was then 8 years old, in our neighborhood pool. It was a warm summer day, and the pool was filled with kids and parents. I suddenly sensed my heart racing. Within seconds, I heard the hum of the defibrillator charging and began to feel dizzy. I frantically swam to the side of the pool as quickly as I could, screaming out for Denise, who was talking with neighbors, that's my wife, on the pool deck. She started running towards me with terror in her eyes. Fortunately, another neighbor recognized something was terribly wrong and tried tried helping Denise pull me out, but it was too late. When the shock went off, Denise actually felt the jolt, since water is an efficient conductor of electricity. How were they going to get me out if they kept getting shocked whenever they touched me? Meanwhile, Denise was huddled nearby with a towel around her shoulder, silently watching everything taking place. Started turning blue, and by the time they finally pulled my body onto the deck, the defibrillator went off a second time. I rolled onto all fours, praying out loud to make it stop, and I got shocked a third time. Boom, boom, boom. I was basically incoherent, but I remember thinking, this is it. I'm going to die right here in front of my family, friends, and neighbors. By the time I was shocked the third time, my lips were purple. I was pale as a ghost and shaking from head to toe from the release of every molecule of adrenaline in my body. The sudden surge of electrical current throughout my body always left me with uncontrollable shakes and teeth chattering for 30 minutes to an hour afterwards. It isn't as if life just returns to normal after getting shocked by a defibrillator. I would be physically drained and emotionally distraught, since each defibrillation meant taking 10 steps backward. No matter how good I felt, or what perfectly normal activity I was doing at the time, getting shocked was like someone smacking you in the face and saying, what do you think you're doing? You've got a bad heart. It was a reality check, and I didn't like it. Someone called 911, and EMS arrived at the pool a few minutes later, along with the fire trucks. Our neighbors were getting used to this. Whether during the early evening, late at night, or in the early morning hours, they often heard the sound of sirens blaring louder and louder as they approached our neighborhood. I hated it. It was guilt-ridden that my daughter had to endure these events. Unfortunately, it wasn't restricted to the Spector household. So that's essentially what it's like to live with a defibrillator. You know, again, you know, thank God for defibrillators, because I remember being a resident before they had defibrillators, and we watched people die miserable deaths from intractable ventricular arrhythmias. But it's the closest thing, I think, to death, because in those very seconds, and it all happens in seconds, everything seems like it's slow motion. But, you know, the defibrillator recognizes an abnormal rhythm and then decides to shock you or not. And that all takes place very quickly. And you realize that you've got essentially 911 sitting in your chest. And there's no EMS with external paddles that is going to save you if wires running into your heart can't convert you back to a normal rhythm. So in those split-second moments, you sort of feel like you could be here 1 minute, 1 second, and go on the next. That's exactly what goes through your mind. It's a very unsettling feeling, to say the least. Okay to read a few more? Sure. Okay. So I want to take you to some happier moments. This is coming out of surgery, so this is after the transplant. So I had the transplant 7.5 years ago. There's some pictures of here of me running my first half marathon. So I don't run marathons anymore. I still run half marathons. My wife told me I've had my one body replacement part. So no hips, no knees. So I stick to 13.5 miles, not the 26.2. Okay. Coming out of anesthesia a day later, I heard someone speaking to me, but I couldn't open my eyes. Squeeze my hand, she said. That's it, squeeze my hand, Neil. I told myself I had to squeeze that person's hand and let her know I was in here somewhere. It seemed this disembodied voice was coming from far away in a dark hall. But I didn't know how to respond. Take a deep breath, Neil. The voice directed me next. I did, and felt some pressure as they removed the breathing tube from my throat. I took another series of deep breaths, and my eyes still unable to focus. Suddenly I was back. I'm here, I remember thinking as I looked around the room. I then felt the strangest sensation inside my chest. Something's wrong here, I whispered to the nurse, my throat scratchy and raw from being intubated. I pointed to my chest. There's nothing wrong, Dr. Spector, it's just your heartbeat, explained the nurse. For the next 30 minutes, I insisted that it was beating too fast, too strong. It just didn't feel right at all. This thing inside me was pumping away in a super physiologic function. I should have been happy, but I was scared. She calmly showed me that I had normal heart function. It had been over 12 years since I last experienced a normal heart rhythm without a pacemaker. I'd forgotten what the beat of a healthy heart, not regulated by electrodes, felt like. I went from 10% pre-transplant to completely normal heart function in one surgical procedure. In fact, all the indicators were that I was above and beyond the normal range, but for me, quote, normal, unquote, was disconcerting. For so long, an electrical pacemaker had initiated my heartbeat. Now I had a perfectly normal heart, It was not only beating on its own, but also pounding out of my chest. The intrinsic difference between a heartbeat and a pacemaker rhythm was startling. "Oh my God, feel this thing," I said to the nurse, wanting her to put her hand on my chest. "It's like a natural heartbeat," I said. She smiled and nodded. I was giddy. I had a strong muscular heart, ferociously beating within my chest, as opposed to the weak, thin, dilated muscle I'd become accustomed to having. I started laughing. I was exhilarated. "Oh my God, this is unbelievable. Look at me." My color had gone from ashen gray to the rosy pink flesh of a fully functioning human again. That was the first thing most people noticed when they saw me after the transplant. Friends confessed that they didn't know how bad a situation really was because they were accustomed to the ashen gray complexion I had before the transplant. Now I looked like a newborn baby, cheeks flushed with color. So the amazing thing is that they get you out of bed quickly. I mean, when I was extubated, physical therapist came in. I had like 15, I had the Manhattan skyline of IVs and tubes. And he just said, "Okay, you're getting out of bed." So I was like, "Yeah, let's get out." Got those things, put them on, this walker with all the IVs hanging, and walked around. He said, "Okay, I'm discharging you for physical therapy because you don't need me anymore." And I was at the step-down unit 24 hours later and walking 3 miles around the hall every morning. The nurses used to tell me, "Neil, you didn't just have your tonsils out, you have a heart transplant. You really should take it easy." I'm like, "Yeah, this feels really good." So it was pretty amazing.
So you figured out that you had Lyme before the transplant or right after?
No, I was diagnosed with Lyme in 1997.
Okay.
And had the transplant in
Just making.
2009.
Got it.
So I lived with the ravages of the Lyme
Okay.
for another 12 years.
And you were in Pennsylvania for a long time.
Massachusetts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania has the highest number of Lyme.
They
and then
do. I'll tell you where I actually got it. I never tell my wife this, although it's written in the book, so she knows. I actually got it in Delaware at the beaches. So the eastern part of Delaware,
interesting.
Rehoboth Beach, the eastern shore of Maryland, is endemic. And so I went on a trip to Delaware for a family trip to my in-laws. Came back and it was came back to Florida, and it was shortly after that my symptoms started.
Wow.
So I'm pretty sure that's where I was bitten. Again, to debunk the Lyme disease myth, most people do not have that. If there's a target disorder, they do not have the beautiful classic rash.
The red ring.
Exactly.
The red.
Depending upon your complexion, if you get bit under your scalp.
That's where I got mine. Back of my head. I hear that people get bit there a lot and they can't see it.
Yeah.
So.
People don't generally remember being bitten by the tick. First of all, if you took a felt pen and you just dabbed your skin, that's what these ticks, they're called nymphs. They're very small. They're not like a dog tick where you could see. The tick actually secretes something in the saliva that numbs your skin so that you don't feel the bite. So that you don't even feel the bite because the tick has a protective mechanism to prevent you from sensing that you're being bitten. So most people never remember it. Most people don't have the rash. If I think back, 20 years ago, I may have had something that looked like contact dermatitis around my belt line, and I went to my doctor, he gave me steroid cream, and that may have been because it was around that time. It clearly was not like the rash that everyone looks for. So there's a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people and their doctors look for that beautiful bullseye. It ain't going to happen in most people. And now, without getting into the politics, but with global warming, this isn't just a spring and summer event. There are ticks in North Carolina. They're all year round. You can go out in January and get bitten by a tick. I'm sure it's the same in Texas.
Yeah.
So, and these ticks are on the move. I saw a report on dogs from vet school at NC State, tracking county by county around the country, and you could see Lyme disease in dogs moving across the country.
Yes.
So if dogs are getting it, people walking their dogs and playing in the yard are going to get it too.
If a person feels they're experiencing all the symptoms and the doctor will not cooperate, how do they get above that? How do they get around it? How do they get to someone that will listen to them?
Switch dogs.
That's very important.
So there
First
are,
of all, listen.
and again, I don't want to. There's a divide that I've never seen in medicine before. Admittedly, I've been in oncology, but I've never seen a real town-gown divide between the academic world, who have their own society, and again, I'm not casting, dispersions. It's called the Infectious Disease Society.